Hi, writers. You're reaching the end of your writing pieces, so it's time for you to start thinking about the way you want to end your story. Before we get into the lesson today, I just want you to take a second to read and listen to a famous ending. You might also be thinking about endings from the stories that you love. Here's the ending from Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. Wilbur never forgot Charlotte. Although he loved her children and grandchildren dearly, none of the new spiders ever quite took her place in his heart. She was in a class by herself. It is not often that someone comes along who is a true friend and a good writer. Charlotte was both. When I read this, I think about how the author is really bringing out some of the major ideas in the story all at once, kind of like reminding us of what the story was about, and also how the story really was a struggle. We're kind of reaching the end of this character's journey, the struggle, and in this part here, we kind of feel like things kind of come to an end. So it helps us kind of like see where the characters end up and reminds us of some of the main issues or the main themes that have come up throughout the story. Today, I want to teach you that, like E.B. White, you can write an ending that leaves your reader with something big at the end. Writers think back to what they most wanted or struggled for in their stories and ask, what is it I want to say to my readers about this struggle, this journey? Then they write an ending that shows this. So you might be thinking, if you're reaching the end, do you feel like maybe your main ideas, your themes, your issues, the character's journey hasn't really been clarified yet? Well, you're in luck, because your ending is where you can really make that super clear and finite and clarified for your readers. So I want to just give you a few ways you might think about this. But before you even do that, I want you to first think back to, what did you decide what your story is really about? Have that in your mind before you look at the next part. What is your story really about? What are you trying to show? Once you have that in your mind, you're ready to think about how you could end your story. Okay, now let's think about, with that in mind, what our stories are really about. How can we end the story in a way that really shows and makes those connections for our readers, just as E.B. White does in Charlotte's Web? These are a few ways you could do this. You could take your ending and make it almost link to or reflect or almost echo the beginning, so you hear little pieces of what happened earlier in the story. You might end with a small action with a big meaning. You might end with maybe two characters hugging or making up. Maybe you're ending with holding a basketball if your whole story was about overcoming an obstacle with your basketball team. You maybe, letter C, maybe you ask big questions that you still have about that time in your life. Because maybe when you tell the story or when you're reaching the end, you haven't actually quite figured out exactly what you learned. So maybe you leave it up to the reader. Maybe you really clarify the lesson and you say, this was the day I learned that, or years later I still think about. Maybe even ending with a flash forward to show how it's affected and changed your life. You might end in the moment with a big internal thought. You're thinking a realization you had, or you could have a total plot twist. I have a bunch of different ways I've tried this workout. You can see my chart on Google Classroom if you want to just see some examples of how this work could go and what it could sound like. For instance, when I do the link to the beginning, this is another story I've been working on, I might echo the beginning and how it all started. My story that I'm working on here started with some chaos. I put my headphones back on and pulled the quilt over my head. So this story that I was writing starts in bed, hiding from the world, and it ends back to where we started. I also have tried to do things like small, tiny actions. So this is what B could look like. I think the ending is already something like this. When I got home that day, I crumpled up my shorts and shoved them to the back of the drawer. I never wore them again. So a final thing that maybe you would imagine would be in the end of a movie or a scene. Maybe you say what the story is really about. You can read more of my examples on Google Classroom, where I posted the work for today. But right now, I want you to make a decision of how you want to try this. Maybe try one or two ways it could go first, make a draft, and then commit to one you like. You might do what I did and do all options A through F. Great, but you don't have to. You can maybe just try one or two, or maybe you have something already in mind that you've already been working for that you're seeing on this list. Just know that you don't have to commit to one until you've tried a few. And then once you've written your ending, go back to other things you've been working on this week. What else could you add on to? Maybe you go back to flashbacks, flash forwards. Maybe you go back to dialogue. Maybe you go back to bringing out the big idea earlier in the story, because this is reminding you of some work you still have to do. So first, write a few versions of your ending. Then choose one, add it to your story. Third, decide what makes sense for you to continue working on today based off of feedback, what things you've been assigned, lessons, and get started. You should be writing as much as possible today. I can't wait to see what you do. Keep working as hard as you have been, and things are going to really come together. I'm excited about where these are headed. Just remember to keep using all you know and calling on all those resources.